As I mentioned in this story, the audience here is equally split among men and women. And the data actually shows that the younger you go, there's actually more women. That data came from Eventbrite and Rob Salkowitz, who I sat down with to talk to about Comic-Con, as he's the author of Comic-Con and the business of pop culture. And I began by asking him what Comic-Con means to San Diego.
This is a show that gets a lot of people coming from out of town. So the hotels are full, the restaurants are full. If you walk the streets of the Gaslamp Quarter and all around the city, you'll see people in the shops, people in restaurants. There's a huge amount of commerce generated on the show floor itself. In terms of media hit, this event generates something like 10 billion media impressions, which is, if you calculate the value of that, is in the tens of millions of dollars just in media. There's also an enormous amount of transactions that go on the show floor. They've got 500,000 square feet of people selling old comics and collectibles, t-shirts, toys, games, everything you can think of, apparel, merchandise of all sorts, people selling autographs, artists selling original artwork.
Tell me what Comic-Con was like when it started compared to today.
Well, when it started out, I think it was just 100 guys in the basement, and it was mostly guys, in the basement of a hotel. And these are people that, back in those days, if you were an adult and you read comics, that was an unusual thing because comics were perceived as being for kids. And it was a place where all of these people that shared this unusual interest could get together. In that time, as comics has become more popular as fuel for entertainment, as fuel for television and movies and games and all of this other stuff that's going on, the show itself has exploded into something that is much bigger than just that subculture.
Who is the biggest player currently attending Comic-Con?
You've got Warner Brothers and Disney, so you've got the big studios, you've got the TV stations like Sci-Fi and BBC America, and anybody that's producing genre entertainment. You've got Sony and Microsoft and all of the big game platform and game creators are there. So it's a huge diversity of convergence between the entertainment, media, technology, and publishing industries all in this one place.
Whenever a conference or a convention gets dominated by a big player, other people get pushed to the side. Some feel it may be the smaller artists. Is that happening here?
So this has been an ongoing thing with Comic-Con since the beginning. I mean, in 1976, an independent director named George Lucas brought his film Star Wars here. So there's been a lot of crossover between media and the comics community almost since the beginning. And this show in particular, San Diego Comic-Con, because it's so close to LA, gets a lot of the Hollywood stuff and has always done that. That said, this show is organized by a nonprofit committee, which is very unusual. A lot of the big conventions in North America are run by event companies that are for-profit. Because they're a nonprofit and they're mission-driven, the guest list that you'll see published by the convention focuses almost exclusively on artists and people who are important to the history of comics as an art form. And all of the other stuff kind of comes along with that, but the convention institutionally still remains very dedicated to the artists.
The female superheroine has been around for quite some time, but do you think this year things are starting to change? Starting
in the 2000s, a generation that grew up watching characters like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Xena and things like that, young girls and women who really wanted to see empowering female characters represented in the pop culture that they enjoyed as much as guys did. And finally, the industry is starting to catch up, and we're seeing characters like Ms. Marvel, and Valiant has a character called Faith, and there's Squirrel Girl, and there's Lumberjanes. There's all kinds of characters now being created, I would say primarily for young women and girls, but that have a really broad appeal that are going to broaden the market for comics far beyond what the typical guy demographic has been.
In the comic industry, do you believe the female audience has traditionally been neglected?
Less than neglected, just kind of taken for granted, that the comics were produced, especially since the 1970s, produced by guys, for guys, and also the retailers that sell the comics, the stores are mostly owned and managed by guys, so they feel like kind of a boys' club, and that even the women who are interested in going in there and buying them, the atmosphere was a little bit forbidding. What's happened is, first of all, there's been a big change in the audience. The retailers have become more responsive. There's a lot of women at the point of sale now that are there in the stores to guide women to titles that would interest them. And there's a lot of independent publishers as well as the major publishers like DC and Marvel who are much more interested in the female audience and bringing a lot more female creators into the fold to create those titles.
One of the big themes here is diversity among superheroes. Tell me about that.
There's a really conscious effort to diversify the superhero pantheon. Again, a lot of these characters come from the 1940s or the 1960s when ethnic diversity, gender diversity wasn't on people's minds. We've seen Marvel in particular adapt this strategy of they'll replace an existing character like Captain Marvel with Ms. Marvel, or they'll replace, right now there's a new Iron Man coming who is a young African-American teenage girl is going to be getting into the Tony Stark armor and taking over that character for a while. So instead of inventing new characters, they're replacing their older characters with a more diverse set of people behind the mask.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, CCTV-America.com.